What the why am I crying? Seriously, Pyro. It won't let me. I just ran an ad. Why am I crying? See what you did, Pyro? You made me cry. I have no idea why the fuck I'm crying. Turn off, please. Do we? Why is Stream Deck's not working now with VTube Studio? Why am I crying? I don't even know which one this is. Which cry is this? Why are you not connected to VTube Studio? Oh my goodness. That's not what I wanted to do. Oh, yeah, that's on. Do I need to restart my Steam Deck? You know, once I'd like to start stream and things work. That would be nice. I'm trying to not cry, but it wants me to cry right now for some reason. Okay, I restarted you. Why won't you connect to VTube Studio now? How am I making you cry? Like, what the fuck? Why? Why are you not connecting to VTube Studio? Oh my goodness. Okay, well, it's not that one. Oh, it's not that one. That doesn't seem to be doing anything. Oh my gosh. Do I need to restart VTube Studio? You want to make desserts? Oh, I forgot. Pyro. I gotta run an ad for Pyro. I guess we can do that while I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. Okay. Oh my god, it's still crying. I thought that might just make it stop. Will you connect to Steam Deck now so I can turn off the crying? Okay, okay. You... Now why am I doing that? Okay, I'm back to normal. We did it. Oh my goodness. Now I gotta wait a minute and a half for the ad to be done. I don't know why VTube Studio and my Steam Deck were not connecting to each other. Why are we making desserts? Nah, really? Was it Kenyo? I had absolutely no idea. You're the one being mean. I don't know what you're talking about. This is a short chapter. Yeah, I was just skimming and saw the words Dungeons and Dragons, so that's coming up. I do appreciate you, Kenyo. Okay, Hadel, have good food. Oh, I did. I said Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. I was like, who's... No one said dragon. I was like, oh wait, I said Dungeons and Dragons. So I guess I did. Alright, ad's finally over. We're on chapter 26, and it's in Aurelian's point of view. We're gonna try to read as many chapters as I can get through tonight. So we got 9 chapters left in the book. There are so... Oh, I almost forgot the timer. There were so many things people whispered about Riadne Lestern. Ambitious, they called her. From childhood, her sight had been set on obtaining the bone crown. She trained for it, studied for it, lived and breathed and bled for it. Pushed herself to perfection in everything she did, and was satisfied with nothing less. Intelligent, they called her too. The top of every class, the victor of every sparring match. She'd insisted on inclusion in her mother and the Queen's council meetings at such a young age that they doubted she'd be able to do much more than listen, and were astounded to discover instead a keen mind for politics and strategy. Beautiful, strong, talented, these were the things folk were careful to say the loudest about the Seelie Queen of Summer. Because the other words they used to describe her. Do you know why I brought you here, Aurelian? The office where Aurelian stood was a place no one wished to be invited. It was, for the most part, completely ordinary, almost cheerful, a moderate-sized room of off-gray carpet and butter-yellow walls. There was a large bay window to his right, a slate stone fireplace behind him by the door, and a solid oak desk so pale it could almost pass for white, flanked by 4 pure gold bookcases, 2 on either side. By this alone it was actually quite boring. Not the sort of space one imagined for a queen, and not the sort of space one would ever assume a palace's every inhabitant could fear more than a dungeon. It was the columbarium built into the wall between these gleaming units, directly behind the queen's desk, that served as the only visible hint of horror this room symbolized. Dozens of compact niches, set into another slab of nearly black slate. No inscription marked its purpose or revealed what those numerous slots contained. No inscription was necessary. It was Aurelian's imagination that he could hear the last frantic bears of the hearts entombed in that wall. The hearts the queen took from those who crossed her. The hearts of people who, like Aurelian, had perhaps known a little too much about their beloved Queen of Light, but unlike Aurelian, hadn't been wise enough to bite their tongue. Excuse me? The queen is taking people's hearts and putting them in her wall? I think the squirrels are back in the attic, and they're being very loud. Yes, I have read The Tall Tale Heart. But this is a queen! No, I've never heard of that one. The Cask of Amaterio? I've not heard of that. Oh, okay. I lost my place. Do you know why I brought you here, Aurelian? I'll give you a hint. It had nothing to do with your parents. Oh, I wanted them here as a means for control, but do you know why I wanted you? There was an absolute silence. No one spoke until the queen did first. Huh? Oh, because I said I forgot my place. Okay. I meant my place in the book, where I was at reading, which I have done yet again. Aurelian continued to stand. He stared at the niches. He was so tired. Oh, it was late and he'd had a long day. He'd only just returned from Toronto when... Oh my god, I don't know that name. Isolt? One of Riadne's retainers had fetched him from his room and sent him to Riadne's office with tears in her eyes, as though this would be the last time they'd ever behold him. It wouldn't be. He was far too useful a pawn still for Riadne to make him a trophy just yet. He stood and he stared and he waited, and willed his heart not to race in his chest. But he might not yet be for this mausoleum, but he wouldn't be called here unless Riadne was angry with him. Well? Aurelian tore his gaze from the wall. Riadne sat behind her desk, hadn't looked up from the report she so leisurely perused, as though they had all the time in the world for this talk, and they did. She could keep him standing here for days if she wanted. Aurelian shifted, uneasy. We spoke with the High King, Your Majesty. Thank you for arranging that. His Highness was very happy you took his concerns seriously. Am I the sort of person who doesn't take their own son seriously, Aurelian? No, Your Majesty. Another tick of silence passed, followed by another. How close you've become with my Vahan. You spoke with Azurian. How did it go? She still didn't look up at him. Aurelian honestly couldn't say if he preferred that. He assured His Highness he was doing everything in his power to resolve the situation. The Queen snorted. Aurelian didn't dare make comment on it. He thanked him for his concern and invited us to dinner with him and his family, which was why we were so late in coming back. I wouldn't say His Highness is appeased, but he's really quite taken with you. He takes to anyone who shows him attention. Once again he was interrupted, this time by a knock at the door. The Queen bid them entrance, and Aurelian's heart sped faster to see. Ah, Zell, good. Do you know why I brought you here? Go on, take a guess. Zell, the Mer who'd been in Riadne's employment for 10 years now, a member of her royal guard and Vahan's personal trainer. The merfolk could trade their fins for legs, for fins again any time they pleased, but most didn't please. Most didn't like to keep away from their watery homes for long, if at all. They couldn't. The lengths that Zell went to ensure he didn't dry out here. Why he'd chosen to come to the palace of all places, Aurelian could venture a guess that he'd been lured the same way the Queen had won his parents. But while Aurelian and Zell were friendly, it was Vahan who Zell was closer to. Aurelian didn't know much more than that about him. Riadne looked up at last. She set down her report and leaned back in her chair, the severe structure of her face even sharper for the crackling displeasure in her eyes. All of it completely at odds with the serenity in her smile. You let my son use the egress without permission. Zell stepped further into the room, no longer in his ceremonial armor from earlier, but a comfortable pair of brown cotton pants and a loose white sleep shirt. The navy cardigan he'd thrown over top only dressed it up barely, and it was clear by the mused state of his green hair that this summons had pulled him from bed. He met Aurelian's gaze in the briefest of glances before drawing himself to stiff attention at his side. "I did, your majesty." "You let my son use the egress to impose himself on the High King. Perhaps you didn't think it was your place to stop him. Excusable, but it's not. But you let him do this, and I've yet to receive your notice it was done." Zale said nothing. Even he, so quick with words, so charming and personable, who used humor as deflection and whose wit often outpaced his common sense, knew not to press his luck right now. Not in this place. Not in the presence of those hearts lying cold as the stone that caged them. Reaching across her desk, Riadne slipped a silver-handed letter opener free from its sheath and rose to standing. Aurelian swallowed, watched in apprehension as she made her approach, hands folded far too innocently behind her back for the glint of metal between their fingers. "Open your mouth," she said placidly, coming to a halt in front of Zale. Color drained out of Zale's face, but he neither hesitated nor questioned the order. He opened his mouth. Oh my goodness. The squirrels are going fucking crazy in the attic right now. And being very loud. Now I've lost my place again. Yeah, there's squirrels in the fucking attic. I don't see how it's a health concern. Where the fuck was I? Well, we're not touching them. It's not like an attic that you can actually go up into. It's just, you know, the space between the ceiling and the roof. Where the fuck was I at? Okay, I found where I was at. Color drained out of Zale's face, but he neither hesitated nor questioned the order. He opened his mouth, and Riadne made a show of peering inside. "You do still have a tongue in there. Uriel knows I've heard you use it enough. So fond of your voices, you merfolk are. But you, between your incessant chatter and songs, sing something for me, Zale. After today, I'm worried you've forgotten how." When Zale only stared, grey eyes grown large in trepidation, the fingers of Riadne's free hand snapped behind her back. "Souls of poets dead and gone, what Elysium have ye known? Happy field or mossy cavern, choicer than the Mermaid Tavern." Aurelian bit his lip to contain a groan. Whatever else the folk felt about humanity, they had always appreciated human creativity. This song, originally a poem set to music by the founder of the Mermaid Tavern, for which the song had been named, was something most of them knew, but not because their school spent an entire unit on the works of romantic period human poets. The Mermaid Tavern jingle was almost as popular as the Goblin Market bar it advertised. Would Riadne be offended that this was what he had chosen? Would she think he was making light of the situation? "Keep singing," she said, lifting that free hand to pat his cheek. Her smile was too hollow for the fondness it pretended. Aurelian. A step was all it took to plant her next in front of him. "Have ye tippled drink more fine than mine host's canary wine? Or are fruits of paradise sweeter than those dainty pies of venison?" "Yes, your majesty." "Tell me, I want to hear you say it. I know you figured it out. You're very good at playing this game, and I admit I'm impressed. How long can you hold out? How long can all that fight in you last? Aurelian, such a clever boy. So willful, I know, despite your best efforts, that you love Vahan very much. I love him too. I would hate to see him come to harm. The sort he'd find in clandestine meetings with goblins and guns and the drugs I'm sure you're well aware that I know you used to partake in. He'd suspected, yes. There wasn't much the Seelie Queen of Summer didn't know about what went on in her court, and that wasn't the worst of what she could use against him by far. Just as he knew, she saw through his act with Vahan. So long as Vahan remained naive to it, it didn't matter. So long as he still had time. More concerning at the moment was that she knew the bits Vahan hadn't told her about what had happened with Pincher. The turf war they'd found themselves embroiled in, the fairy dust they'd used as pretense for their meeting. Toronto was outside her web of control, but Aurelian didn't doubt she'd find out what else had happened there today. All she had to do was press him for the information, and he would yield. Riadne didn't need his true name to outmaneuver him. I don't anymore, I swear. It doesn't matter. I have heard that on a day mine host's sign board flew away. I don't really care. Nobody knew whither. All that's important is that you continue to do your job, that my son remains safe and protected and alive. You can manage that, can't you, Aurelian? Do you know why I brought you here? Yes, Your Majesty. Good. I would hate to have to punish your charming little family for your failings. Would hate to have to appoint someone else to do your task. However tiresome I find your obstinacy, however much I wish you were just a little more obliging, Vahan is headstrong. He needs a retainer who can keep up with his excitable whims. Am I clear? Do you understand me? Perfectly, Your Majesty. Perfectly. Riadne would replace him if she ever grew more than tired of this game they played, of the things he knew about her versus the things she held over him to keep him silent. His time would be up. She would replace him with someone who didn't care about Vahan nor Aurelian's family. She'd replace him with someone who would work with Riadne instead of against her, to bend her prince to submission and mold him into a puppet for her absolute control. Aurelian would be gone, and Vahan would break, and his parents, his younger brother, those open niches in the wall, would dwindle in number by 3, he was sure of it. You are dismissed. That Zale didn't deserve what the Queen had in store for him in private. That he'd always been so good to Vahan was the only reason Aurelian found the bravery to hesitate following such a firm command. Unless you'd like to stay for the show. Zale began a fresh refrain of Souls of Poets Dead and Gone. What Elysium have ye known? Happy field or mossy cavern, choicier than the Mermaid Tavern. Because Riadne hadn't told him to stop singing yet, but his voice only grew stronger for what she'd just said. He was a better soldier than Riadne deserved, braver than Aurelian by far. No, Your Majesty, he rasped, the words barely audible. Thank you, I'll take my leave. He exited the room. He put as much distance between him and it as quickly as he could, but it wasn't enough. That song had grown louder, twisted in pain, jumbled, indecipherable, no longer words but a tune watered down by sobs and gagging. As Riadne made good on her unspoken threat to divest Zale of what she deemed useless to him, his tongue. Do you know why I brought you here? Down the halls, no one he passed said anything to him. There was nothing to say. I'm sorry, or are you okay, or what's going on. Everyone was sorry. Everyone knew what was going on, what had been going on for years, and no one was okay. Up the floors, they were captives, dolls in a cruel child's playhouse. Butterflies pinned under glass. Vahan knew. There was no way he couldn't. He was intelligent and observant like all children who grew up with parents whose fickle moods made them dangerous. Even if the Queen went to terrifying lengths to keep him ignorant of the worst of it, to pretend at goodness and convince Vahan her occasional heavy hand was something he too would have to learn when he became king. Because no one respected power that wasn't a little bit feared. Vahan was no less a prisoner in this household, and he knew the people who lived here with him were unhappy. Aurelian saw how hard he worked to mediate the nastier moments his mother couldn't help let slip in front of him. How hard he worked to grow up, to ready himself for a throne his people longed for him to take before the queen figured out how to smother his light completely. If Aurelian told him, it would all be over. If Vahan found out how deep this truth really ran, there would be no more pretend. There was no doubt in Aurelian's mind that if Vahan knew just how horrible his mother actually was, he'd stand up to her. He tried to stop her, maybe even dethrone her, because it was the right thing to do. They helped nothing by keeping this secret, and at the same time were too afraid to speak it, to make it real and force the worst that would have to come before things could maybe get better. "Move," he growled to the guards outside Vahan's door. He hated it here. He hated this place. This wasn't his home. This wasn't his court. These weren't his people. He hated politics and court intrigue and bored aristocrats who played nasty games with other people's lives like they were nothing more than hollow pieces in some elaborate chess game. He hated Vahan. He hated that everyone, including himself, was so wrapped up in keeping Vahan safe and happy and whole meanwhile they were crumbling, dying, falling apart right beneath his nose. But he loved him far more. Vahan, who was too much like Riadne in all the best of ways. Vahan, who'd shed his own inhibitions just as she'd shed hers. And the resulting conflict would be something the prince would never survive, and Aurelian was tired. "Do you know why I brought you here, Aurelian?" "Vahan." He burst into the prince's room, riled up and shaking, Zale's song an echo that wouldn't leave his ears. He had no idea what had brought him here, or what he wanted, or what he would say to Vahan, except the sound of retching broke his focus. Aurelian's head snapped to the bathroom, and he moved without thinking to investigate. There on the white tiled floor, amidst a massive clawfoot tub, a waterfall shower, and pristine, stark white furnishings, was the prince curled over his toilet, vomiting up the meal he'd forced down back at the High King's table. His black hair stood out like a glaring stain for all the cold, unfeeling lack of color around him. A pitiful figure, haphazardly dressed in gold pajamas. Aurelian felt his anger beginning to drain. Silently he made for his side and sank to the floor, back pressed against the sink and head falling to join it. "You shouldn't have eaten so much with all that pearl dust in your petal dust in your system." "Another wretch," Vahan groaned. "I didn't want to be rude." Aurelian laughed. The sound was weak and could just as easily have been a sob, save for the fact that he didn't allow himself to cry over anything anymore. If he let the tears start, he had a feeling they wouldn't stop. "I thought you'd gone to bed. I can sleep here." Vahan spluttered a laugh of his own. He murked into a groan and more retching. The prince had managed to scrub all that petal dust off his skin and thank whichever god decided to send them bleth that he'd given Vahan that bit of rowan tree bark to lessen the pure, undiluted fairy dust to this. But Aurelian knew all too well how unpleasant it was to come down from this high. "Thank you," Vahan hiccuped. His lips were dry and cracked, his glamour stripped away. The all-encompassing blue of his eyes were bloodshot, sapphire dark as black, and tremors racked a frame that, in this moment, looked impossibly fragile. Vahan was so young. Aurelian was young too. "Thank you," he managed again, giving Aurelian a brighter smile than someone in his current position should be capable of. "It's selfish, I know, but I'm glad I'm not alone right now." "Yeah," he replied. All the things he had to say, he was too tired for any of them. Drawing his knees up against his chest, he wrapped his arms around them and hugged them close, as though he could physically hold himself together, keep himself from flying apart in 1,000 million pieces. It wasn't until Vahan's head dropped on his shoulder. The prince had now settled beside him, a towel softer than it really had the right to be flung across their laps like a blanket, that Aurelian realized that Vahan had fallen asleep. "Someone tried to make you into a vessel for a philosopher's stone, and I think your mother was somehow involved." He admitted to the silence. I don't think you're selfish, he answered that lonely boy back in the goblin market. I think you're wonderful, but I'm scared, he confessed. It changed nothing. He was running out of time. He's really quite taken with you, my darling Vahan, but then he loved so easily. He loved his father too, and it devastated Vahan to lose him. But not quite enough. It would devastate him to lose you too. You, Aurelian, his last little friend. I've done my best to keep him lonely, to keep him starved for attention, for hope and affection, but the bond between you was instant, rare. I couldn't pass up the chance, and you'd figured it out. Please tell me you have, the way of it all. I brought you here to break him. I brought you here to die. And with you gone, oh, I suppose the only one who'll have to help him pick up the pieces of his fragile heart will be me, won't it? And I assure you it won't be useless love I'll use to rebuild him. Yo, his mom's a bitch. Gathering up the prince, Aurelian deposited him back in bed, fetched him a glass and some water for his bedside table, left just as night became dawn, went back to his room and lay on his bed and stayed there through every meal, every knock, until day became night again. Later, Vahan burst in with news that Zale had had such a severe allergic reaction to something he ate yesterday that the palace physician had been forced to remove his tongue, and a text message that lit up his prince as though he'd swallowed whole bolts of lightning. And damn, Aurelian loved him too. Unfortunately, Vahan loved him. Unfortunately, Vahan loved him too. Yeah, he definitely had an allergic reaction. That's why his tongue is gone now. Well, that was the end of chapter 26. My nose is getting really itchy. Alright, so next we're on chapter 27, and it's an Arlo's perspective. Actually, I'm gonna turn the fan on. I didn't realize it wasn't on. Maybe that's why. It's getting hot and my nose is getting itchy. Citizens of the courts of folk, free folk of the wild, family, friends. No doubt you've heard by now what took place last night in Toronto, as well as this morning's address from the High King himself, which named a reaper as culprit. According to our inimitable sovereign, this creature was also found guilty of the 9 courts of slaughter of ironborn children, a crime that was until now carelessly attributed as the work of the Dark Star. It has been declared that our courts-wide emergency is finally over. It is not. The Reaper may have played a part in this evil deed, but it did not act alone. Too many questions have yet to be answered. Too little information has been given to assuage our fears. The courts have put to rest their vigilance, but we cannot afford to do the same. Until there is proper proof that this shadow that looms over us is past, the Assistance begs you, look out for one another in the days to come. Keep each other safe. We must count on ourselves now. We must be strong where they are not. We must remember we're all we've got. Arlo hit replay. We're all we've got. This tagline was everywhere. On Flitter, the court's hottest social media platform. Okay. On Folk News, their largest news network. It had even spread past folk privatized streaming and onto human sites like YouTube, where most of the comments were filled with things like, what the fuck is this? And Is this some sort of movie promotion? So it actually just has a bunch of asterisks there, but I'm assuming it says what the fuck. That's what I automatically filled it in with. Hello, Edda. Oh, thank you for contributing points to the challenge. But the views kept climbing higher and higher, and will continue to do so until the courts managed to shut it down. Well, thank you. I'm glad you guys are devoted to making me do things I don't want to do. Thank you, Kenya. Yeah, you guys already have it to 19%. It's gonna be 30 days. I'm sure you won't have any problem getting it there in 30 days. We're all we've got. Arlo looked over at the die on her bedside table. It had been an eventful Sunday morning, beginning at the crack of dawn when Thallo had come into Arlo's room with a tray of bacon and pancakes smothered in maple syrup, and an apology for how angry she'd been the day before. Arlo apologized for her comments too, but their reconciliation had been cut short by Thallo's need to head to the palace. Then had come the High King's address. Then had come the assistant's rebuttal. We're all we've got. She couldn't shake this. They shouldn't be alone in this. We're all we've got was the reason things had gotten so bad. It had been what made Arlo venture into the fairy ring. Why she'd risk both danger and the High King's punishment to at least try something, to help in any way she could to expedite the justice that the 9 dead Ironborn and the people who loved them deserved. We're all we've got. It shouldn't be this way, and yet this was true now more than ever. Whatever the person behind these murders intended to do once they succeeded at making a stone, even more people were bound to die. The target would widen, spread beyond the Ironborn community, maybe even the magical one too, and the only thing standing between them and this looming calamity were 4 teenagers, one of whom was hardly any use at all. We're all we've got. She lay in her bed staring at her die, with the assistant's entreaty playing in the background. Nausicaa had seemed so sure Arlo could help Prince Vahan break the seal he needed to get past. If only she could test this theory. They should have done so yesterday when they've all been together, but Arlo had panicked, and the Reaper attack had prevented her from thinking clearly. Arlo wouldn't mind helping them get in if she felt just a little more confident she actually could. If she could scrounge up a sliver of genuine hope that she wouldn't disappoint. It really wasn't much they were asking her to do, just get them in. The High King didn't have to know it was alchemy that helped them to do this. Arlo. Arlo yelped in surprise. Elias. She sat up in her bed, blinking at the boy who just burst into her room as though she'd been expecting him all along. What are you doing here? Much like Celadon, Elias liked to have his fun, but there was no smile on his face right now or glint of mischief in his bright jade eyes. Elias frowned at her, and Arlo might have laughed at how much he looked like his uncle right now, except she was too busy trying to think back on what she'd done to make him angry. Is everything okay? Were you really at the assistant's last night? Caught like a deer in headlights, Arlo weighed her next move. Did Lord Lacan tell you that? No, Elias replied, breezing into the room for her bed. He told Uncle Celadon. I just overheard them. Uncle Celadon isn't a very chill person, and also very loud when he's worked up, which he totally was about this news, so spill. Were you really there? Are you going to tell Cel? Probably. He dropped down beside her. You know what he's like. I kind of snuck away since everyone's really distracted right now, but once he finds out... You came by yourself? Elias, that's so dangerous. You're 11 years old and someone just posted a really controversial video condemning your grandfather for gross negligence. Nope, you don't get to scold me, Miss Secret Rebel Operative. Groaning, Arlo flopped back on her bed. She'd much prefer to be having this conversation with Celadon, but Elias was a dog with a bone when he sensed a secret he didn't yet know. She'd have to tell him something. The problem was, once she opened her mouth to confirm that, yes, she'd really been at the assistants, other things began to pour out too. The assistants turned into the resulting Reaper attack, turned into her prior encounter with this creature, turned into what had happened at the fairy ring and the not troll she'd met there. No one knows, not Celadon or even Nausicaa. I sort of forgot about it when it was relevant, and any time I remembered, it never seemed important, given everything else that was going on. But hey, they gave me something, the not troll. I don't really know what it is, but... Elias held up his hand for a pause. A strange fairy gave you something you don't really know what it is, and you took it? Arlo, that's like the first thing everyone learns not to do. Don't stick things into light sockets. Don't forget to look both ways before crossing the street. Don't take gifts from strangers. What if it was a guise? What if you owe this fairy troll person your soul now or something? What if it's just a die? Look. Arlo grabbed her die from the table and held it out between them. Elias, with the flair for dramatics, cried out, "No, don't touch me with your fairy curse," and flinched away. She rolled her eyes. Honestly, it's fine. I've touched it a bunch of times and nothing has happened. It doesn't do much of anything except follow me around. Like an item in a video game you can't drop from your inventory. I threw it at the Reaper once and when I got back home it was here. Yes, because that sounds like safe and normal die behavior. No magic to see here at all. He plucked it out of her hand and shot off the bed. Arlo scrambled after him. What are you doing? Throwing open her balcony doors, Elias went to her railing and proceeded to chuck it as far as he could into the windy day. "Elias, what are you doing?" she cried, flying to his side. Together they watched it fall back to the earth, wind tossing their hair around their faces. Elias shrugged. "Testing. How long does it take to come back?" "I don't actually know. I never paid attention all that closely." Turning abruptly around, he strode back inside. Arlo stared after where the die had sunk out of sight a moment longer before turning to follow, but halted when she noticed Elias had stopped in the middle of her room. So, not long then. Arlo followed the direction of his stare. There, back on her bedside table, was her die. "Cool," Elias hesitated, "but what's the point?" "Who knows," she sighed. "I only tried to use it that one time, but like I said, it didn't do anything." The Not Troll had been whole worlds of unhelpful when giving her this 20-sided mystery. Perhaps it didn't do anything useful at all. Perhaps Arlo shouldn't have been in such a hurry to get away. Perhaps she should have stuck around to ask them a few more questions so that she'd have an actual clue as to what to do with their present. Or as Elias had pointed out, to check if there were any strings attached in the using. No, wait, the Not Troll. They did tell me something. The die. The Not Troll had told her all about the paths that fate had laid out for her, and others too, which would take her in different directions. Only now was she realizing she'd gone with the path her mysterious companion had wanted her on, the one that crossed with Nausicaa's. But the die, they told her something about that as well. They said something about needing to roll it. All I've done so far is throw it, so maybe I should try that instead. Yeah, okay, but this is all for you. This is all you. If you die, can I have your PlayStation? Father still won't let me get one, and I'll never beat Uncle Sel's trophy count at this rate. Sure thing, Elle. Crossing the room to her table, she picked the die back up. Okay, I'm doing it. Closing her hands around it, she gave the die a shake in her palms. Wait, what, here? Arlo, this is your bedroom. What if something... Arlo released the die. Oh my gods, okay, sure, just go ahead and do it then. The die rolled, not far, and when it came to a stop, Elias rushed forward to see what it had landed on. 4, he observed. 4, again. Just like the other time she noticed what number it landed on. Did it do anything? Elias asked, looking back up at her. Do you feel any different? No, she felt perfectly fine, in fact. Glancing around, nothing about their surroundings seemed any different from a moment ago either. Rolling the die had done nothing, so it really was useless after all. For some reason, this realization made Arlo sad, as though she'd been looking forward to there being some greater purpose behind this enigma. But it was useless, a disappointment, just like her. Figured. Elias picked up the die and examined it in his palm. A few moments passed. I have an idea. Come on, let's go up to the roof. What? Why? What's up there? Just trust me. I'm in my pajamas. So change, you diva, and come on. Success Tower's rooftop garden was a well-manicured common space with seats for lounging and pockets of flowers to soften the city's steel. The northern view overlooked an ever-changing cityscape. The south presented a dazzling view of the sprawling Lake Ontario. No one was up here at the moment. Dense cloud cover blocked out the sun, making for a slightly chillier day, and coupled with the strength of the wind, it wasn't the best conditions for relaxing outdoors. Standing in the middle of the landing, Elias opposite her, Arlo had no idea what he'd planned for her to try, but hoped it wouldn't take them long. She'd misjudged the temperature. In her pink sweatpants and pastel yellow tank top, her arms were already growing cold. She should have grabbed a sweater. Elias didn't seem bothered at all. But then again, he'd at least come in a pale green windbreaker, and there was always a bit of color in his cheeks. Rosy for his glamour, but blue beneath. Okay, he announced. So here's what I'm thinking. Maybe this works like Dungeons & Dragons. I'm sorry, what? Dungeons & Dragons was a game, Arlo knew, and one played with multiple dice. One of those dice was an... I don't know how to say what a 20-sided die is. Icosahedron? 20-sided, exactly like the one she currently held. She never actually played the game herself, though, and had only the barest idea of what its rules were. Thankfully, Elias seemed to know them better. He waved his free hand at her and barely contained incitement, thoroughly over the fact that this could be dangerous and deadly, and now fully immersed in his curiosity. You need an objective. Arlo continued to stare at him. Elias sighed. In Dungeons & Dragons, when you do certain things, the dungeon master will stop you to roll for a skill check and charisma and stuff. Maybe that's how your die works. Maybe you have to declare an action and then give it a roll to see how successful that action will be. Have you actually played this game before? I've never heard you talk about it. No. Well, sort of. I mean, I want to. I bought the starter kit, listened to some podcasts. I made up my own campaign and everything, but so far only Uncle Sel said he'd join, and this type of game works best when there's more than one player. Well, how come you haven't asked me? Elias shrugged. He had a way of acting perfectly unaffected by things that would bother others, which he no doubt learned from many of his family members. To someone like Arlo, who'd been close to him his entire life, he had tales that betrayed what he really felt. You've been busy lately, a bit stressed out over school, and the hearing, and then all this stuff with that girl who died, Cassandra. I didn't want to bother you. Okay, well after we're finished with what Prince Vahan has planned, we'll play your campaign, alright? Me and Sel, and I'll make the prince play too, and his friend Aurelian. And Nausicaa. She'd probably get the biggest kick out of this, but a whole team, yeah? Soon as we're done. Elias smiled, but it was the glow beneath his skin that gave his happiness away. Deal. But hey, we're sort of playing right now, or we would be, if you'd stop stalling. Listen, it's really windy out today. Arlo didn't feel this needed confirming, given the gust that had just blown his white sand bangs into his eyes, but she nodded anyhow. What's the element Unseelie Spring Fae control? Wind? It wasn't only Unseelie Spring Fae who could control this element. Fae born to parents of mixed heritage could inherit one or both, or neither of their parents' elements, so it was possible for a Fae living in Seelie Winter to have power over wind as well. But it was wind that Unseelie Spring prized as proper inheritance the same way Seelie Spring prized their manipulation of nature. Unseelie Autumn their command of the earth, and Seelie Winter water. In Unseelie Spring, those with the strongest wind-controlling abilities were always held up as ideal, notable idols of their culture. And what's the one thing we've been trying to coax out of you forever? The one thing that would force the Fae High Council to grant you Fae status. Arlo felt what little heat there was in her face cool into pale dread. She finally realized where this was going. Elias, no, you're not suggesting that what I think you're suggesting. You can't really be saying I should ask the die to, what, make my magic stronger? Not make it stronger, no. I'm willing to bet it's actually strong enough. What I'm suggesting is that you should ask the die to give your magic a boost past whatever's holding it back. He tossed the die to her, expression far too serious for the absurdity he'd just spoken. Arlo caught it on instinct. Arlo, you just told me you outran a Reaper. Yeah, it was definitely slowed down by its surroundings, but it's a Reaper. Slowed down or not, an ordinary person, an ordinary Fae, shouldn't be able to escape it like you did. Enhanced speed. That's a windborn gift. You've got it in you, I know you do. What if this die could help draw out your magic properly? Impossible. It couldn't be that simple. After years of tears and stress and anxiety, of pushing and pushing and pushing herself to be better, and hopelessness when she wasn't. After a lifetime of magic that just wouldn't come, it couldn't be this easy. It couldn't be that all she had to do was roll some die like playing a game and this monumental problem would be solved. But what if? What should I do? She heard herself ask, quiet as though speaking this question too loudly would scare away any chance of this working out. There's a lot of wind here today. Ask the die to help you make it stop. Just say, I make the wind in the city stop. Again, without her permission, she felt her hand close over the die. Her eyes fell shut. Okay, I make the wind in the city stop, she declared in a voice that was bolder, if still a little shaky. Like a train chugging to a halt on its track, the world seemed to give a violent lurch around her and stutter to a halt. The panic beating of Arlo's heart was deafening in her ears, swelling to a crescendo in the sudden and complete absence of all other sound. Opening her eyes, she gasped when she realized the world had halted quite literally. The world had turned an alarming shade of stony gray. Everything around her had frozen. The birds in the air, the traffic in the street down below, nothing moved an inch. Time suspending them in place, like bugs trapped in amber, where no one seemed to notice beyond the limit of this zone, which seemed to be a few hundred feet, as up above the clouds still streaked by. From what Arlo could tell, the cars and people down below carried on as though nothing was amiss. Maybe much like when they encountered a glamour, their minds were glossing over what they saw with what should be right. So she's just in a little bubble right now of everything being stopped? Okay. Inside this frozen space, only Arlo was left mobile. Elias had frozen too, fixed to the roof like a statue. I guess so. She somehow froze a bubble of space. Holy crap, she cried, breathless in her mixture of wonder, alarm, and terror. Has she actually done it? Has she failed to be specific enough, and in trying to stop the wind had actually stopped more? Was this reversible or permanent? Please don't be permanent. She could feel her panic kick up several notches. Like Arlo, the die had retained its color, vibrant jade that seemed even brighter in this new and dreary world, and gold lettering glittering almost cheekily up at her. Stupid, she cursed, both at herself and the die, and folded her hand back around the offending object. Lifting it over her head, her immediate reaction was to pitch it away, but her gaze caught on something else. A shimmering glint of an emerald green above her head, which, when Arlo actually looked, turned out to be a number. The number 17 to be precise, and it hovered in midair directly over her head. Arlo stared. What the? And it was then she realized there were words as well, burning bright as polished gold, written on the very air. She took a step back to read them. To her left was escape time stop. To her right, and slightly grayed out, was the singular word assist. To the front she saw the word roll. What the fuck is going on? Holy crap, Arlo repeated, because it needed saying twice. The notch roll in the nightclub had given Arlo a magical die, and Elias had been right on the mark with how to use it. Well, that was lucky. The rapid beating of her heart began to slow out of its panic, but adrenaline kept it pounding firmly in her chest. She might actually be able to do this. On a whim she uttered roll, and the writing shattered into glittering dust, wiping itself out of the air. The world remained frozen, waiting. Arlo eyed the number above her once more and bit her lip. Shaking the die in her hand, she knelt to roll it on the ground. 18, the die proclaimed when it stopped a couple feet away. Did that mean she cleared her objective? Or did she have to roll 17 exactly to make this work? The world gave a clunk, then shuddered, then threaded itself back into gear. The train picked up speed on its track once again, and all of a sudden the world burst back into fully saturated life. A shudder passed through her then too, warm and tingling and joyous, like unfolding legs that had fallen numb and feeling the blood rush back through them. The number above her was gone, and everything was back to normal, as though it had never been otherwise. But that wasn't what made Arlo's eyes grow wide. Her breath catch in her chest, and her throat close around a deluge of emotion. That's a bunch of words smashed together. That's not a real word. Hope, awe, fear, bewilderment. Hope, awe, fear, bewilderment. Okay. They just smashed all those words together to make a new emotion, I guess. Elias blinked. Unaware that anything had happened since she'd called out her move, he opened his mouth, but before he could ask whatever he'd been about to say, nothing came. He blinked a few more times. Together they stood on the rooftop and gaped at the sudden stillness around them. No hint of even a breeze as far as they could see. Arlo had done it. Arlo, Elias breathed, and he beamed. Arlo, you did it. They stood there for 20 minutes just to make sure it had actually stopped. Make it start back up again. She didn't know how. She'd never been trained for this. But when she asked the die for help and once again cleared a much lower number, there was once again that tingling of magic, and the wind had picked up once more as though it had never faltered. Oh my gods, Arlo, do you know what this means? She did. It meant she wasn't useless after all. If this die could make her magic stronger, if it could help her succeed in something she'd been struggling with her entire life, how much harder would it be to get it to help her succeed at other things? Things like helping a prince break into a questionable facility guarded by alchemy. This die, it meant there was actual hope that she could be something other than a disappointment. I have to send a text, she cried, and fled back inside. Once back in her room, she snatched her phone from the bed and fired off a message. Group message to Vahan, Aurelian, Nausicaa. From Arlo. I'll do it. I'll help you. From Nausicaa. Oh, it's a sword! Okay. Nausicaa made a sword out of, colons and parentheses and stuff. Fine, I will too. Vahan. Yes, perfect, thank you. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Alright, there's a break in the page because I guess we're going to Hero's perspective now. He doesn't get his own chapters, apparently. He just tags at the end of other people's chapters. Hero sat on the floor of his office, slumped against the wall. The shelves that lined the room like ribs, the instruments and books they supported, the overhead strips of lighting, his desk, everything was gutted, twisted up, broken, hanging by wires, the way veins held on to eyes pried from their sockets, or strewn like a spill of organs. Nothing had been spared Leth's wrath, not even Hero. His body was sore for the abuse he'd survived, his face split by a score of bleeding lines. 4 that streaked from his eye to his mouth, and 1 that curled over his jaw, where Leth had grabbed him by his claws and screamed at him. I should kill you for this. You're nothing to me. They're closing in on you, Hero. The prince, his friend, my cousin, Arlo, and I'm going to let them. I'm going to let them find you here, destroy everything you've built, reduce you to the pathetic waste you've always been. I told you to leave her be, but you couldn't. Why couldn't you do this one simple thing? We're through. These wounds wouldn't heal over easily. Such was the nature of the claws Leth wore. The damage they inflicted ran deep and could never be fully erased. The hero had his stone. He carried it always. The magic it could help him perform should be just enough to stop the bleeding. There was no doubt in his mind Leth knew this. We're through. They weren't. Leth had destroyed his office, but he'd spared Hero's life. He'd been angrier than Hero had ever seen him, but he'd left him with everything, his stone included, when he could have easily taken it all. We're not through. You're hoping I'll redeem myself, aren't you? Arlo was coming. Leth's warning was enough to know that Leth hoped she'd leave as she'd come, alive. Hero watched as droplets of blood soaked into his pants, growing a stain that spread wider and wider. They weren't through. Leth had raged, but Hero hadn't expected otherwise should he catch wind of this plot before Hero could see it through. Leth thought he needed Arlo, until Hero succeeded in proving he didn't. So of course he was going to be upset. Of course he wouldn't understand what Hero was doing was all for him. A book lay at his feet, his journal, one of many casualties to Leth's rage ire. Gingerly he bent forward and dragged it back toward him. His journal was where he kept his ideas, the arrays he played with in the attempt to create something new and push his magic to further heights. Arlo was coming. She would not leave alive. But his Reaper was gone, and he'd have to accomplish this goal by himself, and maybe he had better means to do so, anyhow, than a creature whose legend had clearly been nothing but hype. Incompetent, witless, clumsy, Hero flipped through pages until he landed at last on what he'd been looking for. The array drawn there was something he'd been working on for months. It had proven difficult, much more so than originally anticipated. He knew he had the right formula, but something was missing, something he'd failed time and time to get right. In frustration, he'd set it aside, but something in him whispered now, what if? What if this was the push he needed? What if, now that he no longer had other tools to fall back on, he'd have no choice but to figure this out? What if all he'd been missing was proper conviction? I'm going to let them find you here. Good. Let Arlo come to him. Let her fall into his clutches, out of sight, trapped below the earth where no one would ever find her. Killing this girl would allow Leth to see him for what he was, what he could be to him and every other immortal, too focused on the wrong person. Killing her would remove her as an obstacle, but if he could somehow absorb what made her special on top of this, if he could add every bit of whatever measly talent she had to his own. But I can't risk you popping in on me again, he muttered and flipped the page. The array on its back had been difficult to craft as well, but he'd perfected it long ago. He just hadn't been given cause to use it until now. Leth had always been welcome wherever he wanted to go, but Hero was out of strikes. He knew that Leth wouldn't abide another attempt on Arlo's life. He'd kill Hero, the friendship between them be damned. Hero had to protect himself until he was ready to reveal his hand. Had to cancel out what allowed Leth to teleport into this laboratory. Hauling himself to his feet, Hero tucked his book under his arm and made for a door that was now just a gaping hole in the wall. Arlo was coming. This would be all over soon. Hero had much to do as fast as he could to prepare for her reception. I was in chapter 27, and my nose is getting so itchy. Oh my gosh, my nose is so itchy. It would probably help if I pull up their stream first before rating. There we go. There's the raid message. I'm gonna copy it before I forget. Oh goodness, my nose is so itchy. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be streaming tomorrow, so I probably won't be streaming again until next Monday. Because it's boost week at work, so that's gonna be fun. I'm gonna be so exhausted by Monday. So I'm gonna use tomorrow to just rest before I have to go back to work. Okay, well we're about to raid now, so bye.